Well, hey, everybody. Man, it is great to be here with you. I've been loving this series, Summer on the Mount, which is our little play on words for the Sermon on the Mount. If you're not familiar with that, that's in the Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. And it's really a time when Jesus, he's gathered up some followers. People are coming after him. And he basically pauses to go, look, if you're actually going to follow me, you should understand what that means and kind of what that means to follow Christ for them back then, but also for us today. And so it's so helpful, and it has been so helpful, and it's going to continue to be so helpful for all of us as we just dive deeper into what it means to live a life for Jesus. Last week, Zach did such a great job with a really difficult subject, kind of using his own childhood experience and experience with kind of his parents to tackle that. And I just so appreciate him and the great job that he did speaking that message to us. And while I really appreciate Zach, there are a couple of pastors that I don't appreciate on our staff. Sorry to have to call them out right in front of you, but you know, it's necessary to address some deep wounds I've experienced by Jeremy Anglin and by Steve Allen. These are two guys who seem on the surface to be really nice and caring and supportive, but the truth is they're not. And the reason they're not is for the last couple of years, Jeremy and Steve have made a point that they have become grandfathers and I have not. They have talked about the pregnancies of their kids and the birth of their grandchildren, and they've paraded their grandchildren by my office and went, oh, I'm sorry, you're not a grandfather, are you? But no more. This is Brody, right? Brody is 2 months old. And as a matter of fact, he's here today someplace. My daughter said she was here in the service. So he's here right here with you. Man, I love this little guy, and it is so fun being a grandfather. And the truth is that, look, I didn't ask for this. I didn't hire anybody for this. But somebody came in and did an independent study in our offices and determined that Brody is cuter, smarter, and more awesome than Jeremy or Steve's grandchildren. So no bias. I'm just reporting the facts. Okay, that was the determination. Now, obviously, I'm kidding. These guys, I love these guys. They are good friends of mine. So one of the things I love most about VRL is just the relationships, the depth of relationships, the friendships that we have. And both these guys are a regular source of encouragement to me. And they speak into my life, and they support, and they uphold me all the time. I know they do that for a lot of you as well. Because words are powerful, right? Words are powerful to support us, to encourage us, to celebrate us. Words can also be very harmful. They can tear us down. They can drag us down. As a matter of fact, do you realize that the very first sin ever recorded in the Bible was the sin of words? It wasn't actually Adam and Eve, eating the apple or eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge and evil. That was the first sin of mankind for sure, but it wasn't the very first sin. The very first sin was actually the lies that the serpent told. And that ended up leading to a broken relationship, because that's kind of what lies do. And we try to justify them in a lot of different ways, but that's what lies do. They break trust. And when you break trust, you break relationship. So today we're going to be talking about the importance of our words, importance of our integrity. And Jesus is going to address this in the Sermon on the Mount. And he's going to help us to understand how it affects us and how it affects others as well. Now, I don't want to repeat what we've been talking about for the last couple weeks, kind of the core, the background, the setting. I don't want to repeat all the information there, but in case you're new or in case you're just joining us, maybe you haven't been here for a couple of weeks, whatever, just to kind of give you the lay of the land. Basically, Jesus is speaking to a group of his followers. Obviously, there's people there as well who are not necessarily followers of Jesus, but are curious about Jesus. He's speaking to all of them, but all of them come from this Jewish culture. Whether they're Pharisees, Sadducees, the religious leaders, or the people of the day, they all kind of fell into the same boat. Their faith, their relationship with God had really had evolved into an abuse of the law. It was taking the law of God and twisting it around to the way that they wanted it to be, the way they liked it to be. And the easiest way I can say what was happening with them is the same thing, frankly, that we fall into today, sort of one of two camps. One camp is this. I go, look, I want to follow Jesus. I want to go after Jesus, and I'm going to determine, how do I live a God-directed life? I want to honor God with my life. How do I go about doing that? But there's another way that they had fallen into, almost as a whole culture, that we fall into as well, which is this: how much sin can I get away with and still go to heaven? Right? In other words, what's the bare minimum of God being happy with me? It's sort of like how you have two different people that deal with credit cards. Right? You have some people that get a credit card, and as soon as they get something on the credit card, they want to pay it off. They keep that card clean. They keep that card empty. By the way, really good advice. Go ahead and do that. Then there's another camp of people that go, well, what's the minimum payment that's required? That's what I'm going to pay. I'm going to pay just the bare minimum. Well, they, as a society, and unfortunately us, today, we can fall into that second category. And just kind of, what's the bare minimum? Well, Jesus has been and will continue to confront that mentality throughout the Sermon on the Mount. And this time, he's going to challenge our words, and he's going to challenge our integrity. Look at Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 to 37. He says, you've heard that our ancestors were told, you must not break your vows. You must carry out the vows you make to the Lord. But I say, do not make vows. Do not say by heaven, because heaven is God's throne. And do not say by earth, because the earth is his footstool. And do not say by Jerusalem, for Jerusalem is the city of the great king. Don't even say by my head, for you can't turn one hair white or black. Just say a simple, yes, I will, or no, I won't. Anything beyond that, he says, is from the evil one. Now, this is the fourth of 6 comparison statements that Jesus is in the middle of making on the Sermon on the Mount. In other words, he's going, look, you've heard it said this in the law, or you heard it taught this about the law, but I am going to say it this way. Each time he's raising the bar, not to make it more difficult on us, not to raise the standard so that it's even harder to be, acceptable in God's eyes, actually to simplify it all, but to dig deeper into our hearts and deeper into our lives. Now, if we're going to understand what Jesus is addressing in this passage, we're going to have to understand kind of what he's even talking about, these vows or these oaths that he's referencing. Frankly, it's not a whole lot different than vows and oaths that we continue to make today. A vow or an oath, it's a solemn promise to indicate that you're telling the truth or something you do to seal an agreement. In other words, oaths are made, vows are made in order to add emphasis to your words. You've been doing this your whole life, by the way. You remember when you were a kid? Cross my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye, right? Billy, I didn't steal your baseball card. Cross my heart, hope to die, I'm telling the truth. You can count on that. Or maybe we even take it up to the next notch, the next level, and we pinky promise. We pinky swear. I pinky promise that I'm going to live up to this commitment, or that I'm telling the truth. I'm not sure when the pinky became the delineator of truth. I know there's meanings for other fingers. We won't get into that. But the pinky apparently is truth, right? It's integrity. And so we pinky promise with our friends to make sure that they understand that our words are true. Now understand this, there's nothing inherently wrong with a vow or an oath or a promise. That's not the point that Jesus is making in this passage. What he's specifically addressing in this passage are false oaths and false vows. See, what they'd done is they'd taken the law and they had twisted it around to serve their purposes. The law said, make an oath, make a promise, use the Lord's name to stand up for your word. But what they were doing is saying, well, I'm not going to invoke God's name. I'm going to talk about Jerusalem, the city where God dwells, the temple. I'm going to talk about the heavens. I'm going to talk about the earth that God created. I'm going to talk about my own head. Those kind of things. I'm not going to invoke the name of God. There was a specific reason, because they felt like as long as they didn't bring God into it specifically, well, then they didn't have to keep their oaths. It was a way to appear like they were going to have integrity, to make people feel better about the decision, but actually to not live up to it, rather to find a way to get out of them. Now, the truth of the matter is, oaths and vows, they're just a part of our life. They still are today. We don't make as many verbal oaths or verbal vows in our life like they used to. We still do sometimes, right? A couple weeks ago, just about a week ago, I was at a wedding. Jeff Semany's daughter was getting married. They spoke their vows. They spoke their oath to each other. Officers swear themselves in. Authorities swear themselves in. We can stand up and make pledges and commitments with our words. We use them all the time. Most of the time now it's more in a written form. Now it's even becoming an electronic form. You know, every time you swipe your credit card, you're actually making an oath. You're making a promise. You're making a vow that you're going to pay back the company who's paying for this bill, right? You swipe your card, $20, whatever. I'm going to pay that back. And if you don't pay that back, there's penalties for that, right? It's called interest. And or even beyond that, if you don't pay, if you keep not paying, then the penalties get even bigger. But that happens all the time. It happens every time you sign a contract. When you signed up for your cell phone, you signed a contract saying you'd make these monthly payments, you'd pay off the value of your phone, blah, blah, blah. It's a contract. When you bought your house, you signed papers, you made oaths and promises to pay back the amount that the bank had loaned you to purchase your home. The list goes on and on. There's nothing wrong with an oath. There's nothing wrong with a vow. As a matter of fact, the Bible addresses oaths and vows over 200 different times in the scriptures. And not just the Old Testament, the New Testament as well. How to make oaths, what makes a good oath, what makes a bad oath, don't break your oaths, examples of good oaths, examples of bad oaths, very destructive oaths that took place in the Bible. Even the Apostle Paul talks about people making oaths, even himself making oaths and talking about those things. There's nothing wrong with an oath other than there's an inherent problem with oaths. And the inherent problem with oaths are people, okay? That's the problem. People have what's called a credibility gap. We all have a credibility gap. You know, that space between what we say and what the actual truth is. And unfortunately, that gap keeps widening and widening. I'm not that old. I'm not that young, okay? I get that, but I'm not that old. But I still remember a day and an era where somebody would give you their word or they would shake your hand and you could pretty much count on the fact that that person would live up to whatever they just told you, whatever they committed to. And yet those days seem to have changed quite a bit. I mean, even authority figures, right? Back when I was young, authority figures took it on as an extra responsibility that they would be trustworthy, that they would speak the truth. And we expected that of them. And yet times have clearly changed. I don't know if you've noticed, that's not really the culture of the world we live in anymore. We see it all around us. The gap is widening at an exponential rate. And frankly, that gap is tearing relationships apart. I mean, right now we see it tearing our nation apart, right? We just saw this presidential debate that took place and all the turmoil and everything. You know, what's crazy about that is these fact checkers. The fact that we have fact checkers is crazy in the first place. But you know, you see the fact that, and it doesn't matter which side you're on or who you're for or who you're gonna vote for this year, that doesn't matter. The fact checkers all determined that there's things that both Biden and Trump said that were true, that were false, or that they classified as misleading, sort of a lie, just not really, okay? And they went through and fact checked this. You know what's even crazier? After this debate, I saw a list of the fact checking that took place, and then I saw another media outlet that was fact checking the fact checkers of the facts. Because we've gotten to the point that we can't even trust the fact checkers to not have their own personal agenda or their own personal twist on what the truth is. And you know, folks, this isn't all about politics. You know, this is happening everywhere in our world today. Do you know there's actually companies now whose sole product is the truth? That's literally their product. People hire them to determine whether things are true or not because our society has gotten this crazy. You know, corporations use them all the time for their hiring practices now. You fill out an application, you fill out turn in a resume, they will send it to these companies and they will confirm, did you actually go to that school? Did you actually get that degree? Did you actually have that GPA? Did you actually work for those companies? Was that actually your role? They are able to check it all to see if what you're saying is true. They apply it to products and research and all these different things. Folks, that is this kind of crazy season that we're in, and it all is coming at this terrible, terrible price. We see it all around us. Man, we're culturally being torn apart, nationally being torn apart, personally being torn apart. torn up by other people's lies and deceits. And we see the signs all around us. Like, you just can't even ignore it. There's a credibility gap no matter where we look. Now, there's two main problems that lead to this. Two main problems that lead to the problems of people and the credibility gaps. The first is a tough statement, but it's one that we all have to wrap our brains around, which is this: we are liars. Okay? We lie. It's an interesting thing, right? You know, you never have to teach a child how to lie. You don't get to Billy, little Billy, honey, he's in 3rd grade now. He's never told a lie. We have got to help that child figure out how to start lying better, right? No, we don't have that problem. No, instead we walk into Billy's room. He's holding a blue crayon, and there's crayon all over the walls. And we look Billy square in the eyes. We go, Billy, what happened? And he will look you square in the eyes and go, I don't know. As if some mystery happened. And so you press in on Billy and you try to help him to tell the truth. Finally, he'll confess that the dog did it. And that's the frustrating thing. You've had this dog for 2 years and now it's coloring on the walls. Sorry, couldn't resist that one. But seriously though, right? We don't have to teach our kid these things. We've never had to learn how to lie. It just comes out of us. We all lie, we exaggerate, we tell half lies and partial truths, we shade reality, we stretch the truth because we feel like it's promoting the best. In short, the hard truth is we are liars, and that's for a really good reason, and that is because we are fallen. The Apostle Paul talks about it in Romans chapter 3, verse 23. For everyone has sinned, he says. By the way, in the Greek, that word everyone means everyone. Okay, no exceptions in this room. For everyone has sinned and falls short of God's glorious standard. See, folks, we're sinners, and sinners are prone to lie. But that's only the first part of the problem. Jesus addresses this here. He actually then steps it up a notch, like he's been doing with everything throughout this sermon series, throughout the Sermon on the Mount. And he goes, yeah, okay, they're lying. Obviously, that's a problem. But let me tell you what else is a problem. The second problem that creates a credibility gap is that we like to look for, we like to find, and we like to exploit loopholes. Okay, we like to find ways around the rules, ways to get around our promises and commitments. That's literally what the Jewish people were doing as Jesus addressed this issue about making vows. In other words, it wasn't wrong per se. It wasn't illegal to do so. It wasn't necessarily breaking the contract. It doesn't normally involve lying. We just like to find ways to navigate around the rules. Now, when my daughter Bailey was, I don't remember how old, but she's about this tall, we were going to Knott's Berry Farm. Now, Bailey had been able to go on all the kid rides for a long time, but she finally felt like she was big enough to go on the adult rides, the big people rides. But they have that line, and you have to be taller than the line in order to go on the rides. And Bailey thought she was big enough now, and she always had an adventurous spirit, and so she was ready to go. And so I, being a kind, thoughtful, caring dad, building myself up there, they said, hey, honey, I just helped manage expectations here. You might not be tall enough, okay? We'll see when we get there, and we'll try. But there's a line. You got to be taller on this line in order to get on the roller coaster that she wanted to go on. And, we'll see when we get there. We'll do our best. But I just want you to be prepared. You might not be tall enough yet, because she was kind of borderline. And so Bailey was, looked a little disappointed, a little concerned, but okay, Dad, I got it. And Bailey found a loophole, because the next morning, when we were heading off to Knott's Berry Farm, she came walking downstairs wearing these, okay? These were shoes that she had that had like a 2 or 3 inch heel, sole on the bottom of them. She wanted to make sure that she was going to be tall enough. She found a loophole. I mean, it made her 2 inches taller. She was able to get on the ride, by the way, although it was a decision she regretted. She wasn't quite mentally ready enough for the big people roller coasters, I guess. But she got to have her adventure. Now, it wasn't lying after all, right? Knott's Berry Farm, they're the ones who made the rules. They wrote the contract. There was no clear definition. Nobody said what kind of shoes you were allowed to wear when you measured yourself on against the line. That's their problem, right? But here's the real question when it comes to these loopholes, becomes these workarounds, that just because you can find a loophole, using it, exercising it, taking advantage of it, does that really mean that you're doing the right thing? I mean, is that really living a life of integrity to find a way around? Is it the standard that God's calling us to live? Or is maybe there's something more that he's calling us to live out in our integrity? See, here's the interesting thing. We all fall into this trap of lying. We all like to take advantage of the loopholes to find workarounds and make ourselves the exception. But here's the really confusing thing. The really confusing thing is that God actually tells us to make oaths and vows and to do that in his name. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 20 says, you must fear the Lord your God and worship him and cling to him. In other words, keep God at the center of your life. And then, by the way, this is part of the actual law, the actual teachings and commands of the law. You must fear the Lord your God, worship him, cling to him, keep him at the center of your life, and your oaths must be made in his name alone. Now, why would he do that? I mean, it's no surprise to him that we're fallen creatures. It's no surprise to him that we are prone to our integrity is prone to wander. Well, the answer's pretty simple. It's actually the same reason that Jesus is addressing this problem with the Jewish people in the Sermon on the Mount. See, God was calling them, Jesus was calling them, God and Jesus are calling us today to live separate and different and distinct from the nations and the people around us. To make vows in his name so that people can see firsthand what God actually stands for, who God is. They can see it in our life as we live out truth and integrity and honesty, live out as people who are different, people who keep our word. You see, folks, making oaths, making vows, that's not the problem that Jesus is addressing here. It's lying in deceitfulness that is the problem. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 12 says, don't bring shame on the name of your God by using it to swear falsely. We bring shame on God when we don't live in integrity, when we use our words to speak untruth. But if we can speak the truth, if we can stand up for what is right, then our integrity as a follower of Jesus Christ, then that ends up standing out in the world. We actually end up drawing people to God instead of pushing them away. That's why Jesus gives that simple standard, a simple way to live this out. He raised the bar again by simplifying the concept. Don't make lots of rules, keep it simple. Say, yes, I will, or no, I won't. If we can just do that, say yes, say no, and stick to our word, live in integrity. I'm not sure there's a simpler application of Jesus' teachings anywhere in the Bible. I mean, yes should actually mean yes, right? Not yes, but, or yes, only if, but yes, if it works in my favor. Not no, only until I change my mind or I regret the choice, or no until something better comes along. It's making a choice to live with integrity, to close the credibility gap by sticking to our word and by honoring God then with our word, by living and acting as if we actually represent God in this world. Because guess what? If you're a follower of Jesus, you do represent God in this world. Remember Dan's message just a few weeks ago? We are salt and light. That's what God has called us to be, salt and light, to influence, to flavor, to affect the world around us. Now, for us, this message, I think, was given about a month ago, right? And so maybe we aren't thinking about those words so much, but understand the people that are listening to Jesus' message today, they heard those words just a few minutes ago. They are all connected. As a matter of fact, I believe this whole section, when Jesus addresses all of these principles about the right application of the law and about how to go about living your life and a proper application of the law in your life, is all a follow-up to that simple idea. You are salt. You are light. You're supposed to affect the world around you. God is supposed to shine through your life. People are supposed to see God in you. So Jesus says in this section, stop lying, stop breaking your word, stop finding a workaround to your commitments. Live instead as a disciple of Jesus. Live in integrity so that God's light, God's life can actually shine through you. Now, back in 2009, my wife and I were going through a really hard time. I actually talked about this a lot in a message I did a number of years ago. It was a really tough time. Short version is my wife had gone through a cancer treatment. She's fine. She's all good. She's here today. As a matter of fact, she's watching online right now with my mom. She's fine. She's all good. My daughter also had some medical situations. Again, this is 2009. Remember the housing crash? We were living in Florida at the time, super hard hit in Florida. Also the stock market crash. I was executive pastor at a church down there. Ended up basically having to lay myself off and about a third of our staff had to get laid off. Churches all over the place. Where some were even shutting down, but having to lay off staff, it was a really tough time. Well, there's a lot of things that happened in then, but one of the things that took place was my wife and I were gonna have to sell our house. We got laid off. Churches were all laying people off. There was no place else to be a pastor in that area at the time, so we were gonna have to move. But the problem was the housing market had collapsed. We were now upside down in our house. We couldn't sell it and pay off our mortgage. So we got a hold of the bank. And I want to pause here for a second saying, I'm going to talk about the fact we had to pursue a short sale. Now, I know there are lots of different circumstances, lots of different situations regarding short sales and how they come about and how you have to deal with them. I just want to talk about our particular situation and how we had to deal with ours, okay? So we sat down with the bank, and the bank said, okay, well, you've made all your payments. And we're like, I get that. We haven't missed any payments. That's not the problem. The problem is we've got to move. My wife had cancer, got laid off. There's no jobs available for me in this area. We're going to have to move. And so they walked us through the process, and they said, okay, great. You actually qualify under sort of a life situation reason versus a financial reason. And so as far as payments and all that, so we're gonna grant you the short sale. They were great, they were super helpful and helped us walk through all that. So we put our house up for sale. And as soon as we did that, and people found out we were gonna have to short sell our house, our friends began to tell us, well, stop making your payments. I mean, there's no reason to make a payment. Now, you're losing all this money, you're losing your house, you're losing all this. So there's no sense, you got laid off, you should be saving up all your money. And yet that didn't quite sit right for my wife and I. And so we consulted some close friends, even one of my close friends that was in the mortgage industry itself. And all of them kept saying the same thing. Yeah, you should stop making your payments. The bank's not even expecting you to make your payments. And yet my wife and I, we felt like, gosh, I don't know. Kathy and I are talking about it and we're processing through what do we do about this, and we were praying about it, and we're just felt God saying, no, as long as you're able, you should make these payments. Now, the church had given me severance pay for a few months, and so I was gonna be able to make these payments while I had severance pay. So that's what we decided. As long as I was receiving severance pay, we would make the payments, because after that, I told you we had cancer and all kinds of other stuff. We didn't have any means through which to make those payments. We felt like that's what God was calling us to do, to honor our word. And so that's what we did. And frankly, that's when God showed up. I mean, he just showed up in amazing ways for us, ways that we didn't even anticipate. First of all, God sold our house. And I say God sold our house because it is amazing that our house got sold. In about 2 months' time, people said, yep, we want to buy your house. And they signed up, they signed on, and we were able to sell our house, which was an amazing blessing because at the time, our realtor told us that in our immediate area, remember that the housing crash, 3,000 homes were for sale in our neighborhood. 3,000, I mean, Florida had whole neighborhoods that were getting emptied out. 3,000 homes were for sale, but these people showed up and said, hey, we want to buy yours, which then kept us, because I would have not been able to make the payments at some point, which kept us from having to then deal with foreclosure and to go through that whole process because we couldn't continue to make the payments after the severance pay ran out. So that was a huge blessing in and of itself. Now, the other thing is short sales are more complicated. If you've never been through one, it takes longer to close. The bank has to kind of guide everything. You're pretty much, as soon as you sign the papers, you're pretty much left out of the deal. You have no say. So we sat back and just watched everything unfold. My severance pay was running out. I had already made the last payment with my severance pay that we could possibly make. And it just so happened that our house closed one day, I'm not exaggerating, one day before I would have missed my first payment. God just kind of helped, make everything together, helped everything carry along so that one day before I would have missed my first payment, the house closed and I was no longer required to make that payment. Now, those were enough blessings, and it was just such a great thing to see God show up and just honor the commitments that we had made. But I didn't realize that it's not where the blessings ended. See, jump forward about 6 months. Now, I've found a new position. I'm serving at a church in Savannah, Georgia. We're up there. We're trying to move into a house. We found a house that we want to buy. We want, a place for our kids to have roots, to be able to grow up. Basically, we're starting over in life, and so we wanted to buy a house to be able to do that. I didn't know anything about short sales, so I called my friend who's in the mortgage business and said, Ron, hey, I need a loan. We found a house we want to buy. He goes, oh, no, you're not going to be able to get a mortgage. And I'm like, wait, what? And he goes, no, if you short sell your house, nobody will give you a mortgage for at least 3 years. He goes, it could be up to 5, depending on your circumstances. I don't know what it is now, but that was the rules back then. And he goes, so you got at least 3 years before we could even start to talk to a lender about that. So that was kind of a punch in the gut. I'm like, okay, well, we got to do what we got to do. And we started looking at rentals. Where's a place that we could rent for 3 years? Again, trying to give our kids a new start and some roots that they can put down. And so, we went about that business. Well, about 2 days later, Ron calls me. And he goes, hey, remember when you called me and talked to me about making those payments? And I told you not to make those payments. He goes, but you said you were conflicted about that. And he's a fellow Christian. He goes, you were conflicted about that and really trying to pray about it. He goes, what'd you guys decide to do? And I go, well, we decided to make the payments as long as we could. And he goes, great, so you never missed a payment? And I go, no, as a matter of fact, God, one day beforehand, before we would have missed our first payment, God showed up, made sure that this thing closed on us. So we actually never missed a payment. He goes, well, you're not gonna believe this. He goes, a product just came across my desk where Chase Bank is offering mortgages to people who short sell their homes as long as they never missed a payment. Folks, I can't make this stuff up. And I'm like, well, okay, yeah, but okay, what's that gonna cost me? What kind of penalties? What kind of high interest rate? Whatever. He goes, no. Their program is like for the normal, best conventional rates. No higher rates, no penalties, no extra insurance, no extra fees, no nothing. It's just as if you never had short-sold your home. So we were able to buy that home and give our kids some place to grow up and to put down roots and to celebrate all of that. Now, folks, I'm not saying that if you make the right choices or decisions of integrity that everything's gonna go well for you. Everything was not going well for us in that season in our life. We had lost our home. We lost $100,000 we had put down on that home in Florida, but had been lost through the housing market crash. All that was just gone. I moved to Georgia with less money in my bank account than I did the day we got married. We literally were starting over from scratch because of everything that had gone on. It is without a doubt the hardest season to this day, still the hardest season of my life that I've ever been through. But I know this, by making those decisions, by making those choices to be disciplined and seeking God and being true to my word and doing the hard things, it ended up being one of the most formative times in my life. See, because I made those choices, I ended up being able to grow in my dependence on God. I was able to grow in closer to God just because I was willing to honor my word, to let my yes be yes, no matter what the cost was going to be. And at the same time, I ended up not causing myself to be the barrier to God's blessings. See, if I'd made a different decision, then God could not have blessed me the way that he chose to bless me. And then I would not have been able to be the blessing to other people that I ended up being. And even that house ended up being a blessing to other people as we took care of them. And sometimes people moved in with us and all different kinds of things, a blessing to my kids, a blessing to everybody around us, to be salt and light which is what God calls us to be, to live out integrity that shines to the rest of the world. In the end, my hope is simply that we would all be able to say the same thing. That follow what Jesus is teaching here, that I honored God in my life, and I honored him by honoring him in my words. The things that I say, letting my yes be yes, letting my no be no, living with integrity. Let's pray. Father God, I just thank you so much. Thank you for the way that you work in our lives, sometimes helping us to do some really hard things. Yet those things we know, God, have a purpose and a plan and a reason. And even though they are sometimes the hardest things we do, hardest decisions we make, that God, you work through them to work in us, to work through us, and to bless us. God, we thank you for this teaching. We pray that you would give us the strength to live a life of integrity, to let our words be true and to honor our commitments in every circumstance, God, so that others can see you in us. And that, God, our example would point people towards your love and towards your grace and towards your truth. And we pray this in Christ's name. Amen.